All right, now that you have functions in your tool belt, I want to show you objects. Before we get into it, let's go ahead and create a new file called objects.js. I'm going to save it in the Node Basics folder on my desktop. Also, make sure you have your terminal open and navigated into Node Basics so we can run our apps. Creating a new object is actually really easy. Just like any other variable, you need to start with the var keyword, followed by the name for your variable. In this case, I'm going to call my variable person. After you name the variable, you're going to use the equal sign like always. And all I'm going to do here is open and close a set of curly braces and put a semicolon afterwards. And this is how you define an object. Think of an object as a set of keys and values. So let's use, for an example, a product on Amazon. A product on Amazon has a name, it has a price, it has a star count in reviews, so maybe it's 4 stars. The same thing with a person. A person has a first name, a last name, an age. These are all great examples of things you can model using an object. In the case of a person, let's go ahead and set a couple properties on the person. I'm going to use properties and attributes interchangeably. So I might say the age property or the age attribute. I mean the same thing for both of those. To add a new property onto an object, all you have to do is type the object name, followed by a dot, followed by the property name. Now the property name follows the same naming conventions as the other variables we've created. In this case, I'm going to call my property first, capital N name, for the first name. And just like any other variable, I can set a value to it by using the equal sign and simply, in quotes, typing Andrew. I'm going to put a semicolon at the end, and let's break down what just happened. The first thing we did is we created this new person variable, and we set to it an empty object by simply opening and closing curly braces. Now on this object, we created a new attribute. Notice you don't have to use the var keyword here. To add a new attribute, we referenced the variable name, person. We added a dot to denote that it's a property of person, and then we gave the attribute name. So here, we created a new attribute first name on the person object, and we set it equal to the string Andrew. Very cool. All right, let's go ahead and add another one. I'm going to add another property called last name. So person dot last uppercase N name is equal to, in single quotes, Mead. There we go. Now we have 2 properties on our object. We have a first name and a last name. Now, objects are great at modeling stuff like this. It also makes it a lot easier to add data to functions. Let me show you what I mean. Let's say we have that greet user function we created in the previous video. I'm going to go ahead and type that out real quick. Nothing too special. I'm going to type the function keyword to create a new function. Greet user with an uppercase U is going to be the function name. Up next is the arguments inside of parentheses. Now, instead of having a name and a last name argument, I'm simply going to pass in the person object. Now, much the same way, after the closing parentheses, I'm going to open and close my curly braces, and inside, all I'm going to do is log out hello Andrew Mead, or hello first name, last name. To do that, I need to call console.log. Maybe you just noticed something. Not only have you been using function log since the beginning, you've also been accessing the attribute on an object. Console is an object. It has many different functions, which we'll explore later, one of them being log. All right, now it's time to open and close the parentheses and type our message. In this case, the message is going to be hello, space. Then I'm going to concatenate the first name. Now, in this case, I need to access the first name property on this person object. To do that, I follow the exact same syntax as when I set an attribute on an object. That means all I have to do is type person dot first name. This is going to reference whatever's set in the first name attribute. Up next, I'm going to concatenate a space between the first name and the last name. And lastly, I'm going to concatenate the last name. To access the last name property, I need to call person.lastName. Put a semicolon at the end, and we are done. Now, instead of having a function that requires two separate arguments, we can simply pass in our person object. To do that, you need to call greetUser. Whoops, not greetUser. Now, all I have to do is reference the person object I created on line 1, put a semicolon at the end, and we are done. Let's run this from the terminal and see what happens. I'm going to run node space objects.js, and you can see hello Andrew Mead prints to the screen. Fantastic. Now, we can add as many properties as we like to person. I could go ahead and add an age property. Person.age is equal to 24. Now, anytime I pass around person, I have access to all of this data. This is awesome. We're going to be doing the exact same thing with users and to-do items later in the course. All right, now that you know how to create a basic object, there's a couple more things I want to talk about. First up, removing a value. If you want to delete a value from an object, it's pretty easy. All you have to do is use the delete keyword, which is a reserved JavaScript word. Then you just simply reference whatever property you want to delete. In this case, let's get rid of person.age. Now, to prove that I deleted person.age, all I'm going to do is use console.log, and I'm going to pass in the person object. Console.log can take a string like this. It can also take a number or any other type in JavaScript. In this case, the type we're passing in is person. Let's see what this looks like in the terminal. Here you can see a simple output of what our object looks like. Notice we have the first name and the last name property, but the age property is missing because we deleted it. This also makes debugging objects really easy. You can simply log out an object and see exactly what properties and what values are set on the object. One more thing you can do. When you're referencing a property, you can use this dot notation to create a new one or to get the value. You can also use what's called bracket notation. Bracket notation looks a lot like dot notation. I'm going to delete this first name, and I'm going to use bracket notation instead. To do that, instead of a dot, you open and close a set of brackets. These aren't the curly brackets. They're actually on the same key, but without using the shift key. Once you have your curly brackets, inside, you have to pass in a string name. In this case, I need to open and close my single quotes to create a string. Then I can simply type first name. This is exactly the same as this, only it uses a different notation. So instead of the dot, we're using the bracket. You can do the exact same thing down here. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the last name property. In this case, I'm going to delete the dot. I'm going to open and close my brackets and quotes, and inside I'm going to paste in last name. It doesn't matter what you set it with and what you reference it with. If you create a property using dot notation, you can reference it using bracket notation. Maybe you're wondering why you'd ever want to use bracket notation. There's really only a couple good use cases, one of them being the fact that you don't have to know the property name in order to access it. Now, what I mean by that is I can actually pass in a variable that is the string first name, and I never need to know what that property is. So maybe the property is provided by a user or it's in the database. I could do something like this. var first name property equals the first name string. Now obviously, in this case I know the property, so it doesn't make too much sense, but I'll show you a couple places throughout the course where you don't know the property name, and it's very useful to be able to use this bracket notation. Now in here I can reference the first name property just like I want. You can't do the same thing with dot notation. With dot notation, you have to explicitly know the property, which, to be fair, you do most of the time. When you use dot notation and bracket notation together, you can do anything you'd want to do with objects. Before I give you a quick exercise, I want to show you one more thing that you can do with objects. When you're creating the object up here, you can actually add values right inside of these curly brackets. Much the same way you can add content inside the curly braces to a function or an if statement, you can do the same thing here, only it follows a pretty special syntax. To do it, you need to do two things. First, you have to name the property, just like we did down here with first name property, last name, and age. I'm going to add a new one called gender. Up next, you need to use a semicolon, a colon. Then after a space, you give it whatever value you want. This could be a number, it could be a function, an object, a string. In this case, I'm going to set the string equal to male. Awesome. Now here we have the gender set to male, and this is all done while creating the person object. If you want to add another property in here, all you have to do is put a comma at the end of the line, and on the next line, you can type out your next property. I'm going to go ahead and add eye color. I'm going to type in eye color. Then I'm going to type a colon, and I'm going to set the value equal to the string brown. On the last definition, you don't need to put a comma at the end of the line, only on the other definitions. Notice here I wrapped the property name in quotes. They're the exact same thing. You can use the quotes or you can leave the quotes off. Time for a quick project. I want you to create a new pet object. Give it two properties, a name and a type. Set name to whatever your pet's name is. I'm going to call mine Patches, and set type to whatever kind of animal it is. I'm going to set mine to dog. After you have your name and type property set on your pet object, go ahead and create a new function called printPet that takes the pet object and prints, you own a dog type that's name is name, in that case Spot. So if the type was a cat and the name was, let's just say, Charles, it would print, you own a cat named Charles. Go ahead and create this object and the function. Use the function, run it from the terminal, make sure everything works, and when you're done, go ahead and click play. All right, hopefully you were able to get all of that working. Here's one way you could have done it. First up, you have to create that new pet object. There's no special way around this one. It should look something like this. Whoops. Now you have to add your name and type property. Maybe you did that in line, or maybe you did it down below. I'm going to add mine right inside of the curly brackets. First up is the name attribute, followed by a colon, a space, and then the value. In this case, I'm going to set it equal to Patches. Now, since this is not the last property, I need to add a comma. On the next line, I'm going to type, followed by a colon and a space. Here, I can give my animal a type. In this case, I'm going to set it to dog, but go ahead and set it to whatever type your animal is. All right, that's the first part. If you used dot or bracket notation, perfectly fine. Either way works. The next thing you needed to do was create a function called printPet. To do that, you have to use the function keyword. And you also have to name the function. I'm going to call this print uppercase P pet. It's only going to take one argument. That is going to be the pet object. Next, after the closing parentheses, I can open and close my curly braces, hit enter, and we are ready to fill this out. All I'm going to do is use console log. Inside of quotes, I'm going to get started. I want it to say, you have a dog named Patches. I might have said to say something a little different in the video. Whatever I told you to say, as long as you got it to print, you're good to go. Your. Up next, I want to get the type property on pet, so I'm going to use pet.type. After this, I'm going to concatenate is space named space. Then I'm going to concatenate pet.name. So in this case, your dog is named Patches would print out. Let's go ahead and call print pet by referencing the print pet function, opening and closing our parentheses, and passing in the pet object. Now I can run this from the terminal by running node space objects.js. And you can see your dog is named Patches, prints to the screen. Awesome. As long as you got this to work, you're ready to move on to the next video, which is our first project where we're going to start creating a basic bank account example. I'll see you in the next video.